I really love the Guilty Gear series. I'm a fan of its flashy and unique combat, incredible soundtracks, and anime art style. But one of my favorite things about it are the characters and the lore, which leads me on to say that this right here does not make sense. Not because I don't understand what is going on, because believe me, I don't, but because of just how out there and wild the whole world of Guilty Gear is. So let me give you a quick breakdown of the Guilty Gear story and what makes it so bizarre in as short as much of time as possible, maybe less than 10 minutes. Spoilers, this video is not 10 minutes. Okay, let's go. In 1945, after World War II, the United Nations were created to unite the... Isn't this just actual history? Okay, 1999, this is where the stuff goes down. A prophet comes forth with a prophecy that will shake the world to its core, that the UN declares a state of emergency. What happens? Well, shortly after, all electronic devices in the world are rendered useless, sending people into a frenzy for hierarchical order called the Dawn of Revival, which also led to the ban on electronics. However, a power known as magic is discovered, and then the dawn of the Sanctus Pupil happens, where people move to study these magic sources and nations learn of ways to apply magic. Crazy, 2 major dawns in the span of 1 year. Anyways, 2008, the Sanctus Pupil is established to aid with humanity's recovery effort. India also withdraws from the UN a year later. 2010, the era of sorcery begins, where big efforts are made to de-emphasize technologies from the pre-magic era. Now in 2014, this is where the title of the franchise comes into play, where the gear cell theories were completed. What is a gear cell? They are cells that have the potential to tap into the backyard, which is, from what I understand, the universe that connects everything together that is beyond our own understanding, which can lead those with the power of the gears to be able to use as much energy as possible by accessing the backyard. And you can see how that can lead to problems, but the first gear cell experiments were handled by 3 people. A guy called Datman, no, I'm not kidding, Frederick, and Aria. But 2 years later, something goes wrong, where Frederick becomes the first gear and the other 2 have gone missing. But gears are very powerful, which can alter the look of the potential gear, so Frederick creates a gear cell control to retain his human form. Nearly 30 years later, in 2042, the gear project is resumed by the United States, who want to weaponize the power of gears, and who shows up to help in this initiative? None other than the gear creator, that man, who has been missing since 2016. Now, with many gears at their disposal, the US sends out their gears worldwide, I think for profit and for security reasons. But back comes Frederick, who is intent on destroying all gears and gear facilities, because if anybody knows how dangerous this power is, it's him. Also, the timeline here literally says the leaders around the world call him bad guy, and I know where this is going. This is in 2065, by the way, and now in 2073, the US and that man made a slip up, creating a gear called Justice, who turns on humanity a year later, leading the UN to create the first sacred order of holy knights to fight Justice and her gears. Gears teamed up with her? Anyways, Frederick becomes sole bad guy and saves Cliff from a gear attack in 2103. Yes, that is the biggest event that happened in that year. Into the 2120s, Testament joins the Holy Order and dies within the span of 2 years, but in 2167, Kai Kisk joins the Holy Order, followed by Sol 5 years later. Look, this might seem crazy, and for Guilty Gear veterans, I know that I'm skipping a lot of minor side stories as well, but I'll get to some of those later as I'm trying to wrap my head around the main story of Sol and the Gears. So, sticking to the main path, after a century-ish of Gear Crusades, Justice is sealed by the Order in a dimensional prison, leading to the disbandment of the First Holy Order. Now, jumping to 2180, where Justice might be revived, so they decide to host a second Holy Order selection tournament, but turns out that Testament, the gear that I mentioned that died earlier, suddenly appears and revives Justice, and then they both lose to Sol bad guy. I've also heard that apparently the tournament was also a front to revive or take advantage of Justice, but don't quote me on that. And that tournament was the story of the very first Guilty Gear game. And just so you know, there are 5 more games left to cover, because I think both the Xrd games are the same, but if they aren't, please correct me. So let's keep going, because the remaining games all take place within a span of 12 years on this timeline, which should make it easier to follow, I think. Now, I've not played Guilty Gear X or any of the Xrd games, as I'm just trying to go off of the Guilty Gear lore stuff in Strive and some stuff from the wiki. So if I make any mistakes or confuse you, that may be why. But next up in the year 2181, where a bounty is put out for Dizzy. Dizzy is half gear and half human, and had been raised by some good old folks in the forest until the bounty got placed and Dizzy fought back against those who tried to harm them. And then Sol bad guy just shows up and defeats her, but doesn't kill her. But then somehow Jam, another bounty hunter, gets the record for killing Dizzy, despite Dizzy still being alive and Jam not actually being there. You know, this video is turning out to be just me stating what I know and hoping people in the comments can help enlighten me on the in-betweens. Anyways, Dizzy ends up with the Jellyfish pirates, and because of mutual connections, met Kai and fell in love. This love is important for later. Now we're at Guilty Gear XX, and I think this is where it fits considering the chronological order of the games, but Ino shows up between 2181 and 2185. There aren't many so-called evil characters in Guilty Gear as of right now, so I guess it's fine that a witch with time control powers just shows up, you know, perfectly normal stuff. Anyways, she's here and does stuff. Cool. Guilty Gear 2 now. This is where Baptisma 13 happens. What exactly it is, I'm not sure, but the Guilty Gear wiki says that it's an invasion of the Kingdom of Illyria, which is when the Valentines begin their crusade against mankind, orchestrated by the Universal Will. The Universal Will was created by the original many centuries ago, who was the prophet that foresaw the two dawns before the 21st century in order to reach humanity's eternal happiness. But the Universal Will revolted and then created the Valentine spawns. Also, prior to the invasion, Kai and Dizzy have a child called Sin and collectively decide that Saul Bad Guy should raise him. Don't worry, I'll get to this family tree later. Now we're on to the craziest part of the story thus far, which is in 2187 when Ramlefal Valentine declares war on mankind, and since she is a Valentine, it's the Universal Will that once again wants to try and stop mankind. But it was actually a distraction to once again revive Justice. This is the third time now that people want to revive Justice, and I really don't see the hype behind Justice considering she has consistently failed. But then some woman called Ariels appears and says that she is the Universal Will and declares war on mankind, for real this time. And in order to defeat the guy that keeps showing up and foiling everyone's plans, Saul Bad Guy, Ariels decides to absorb the original, the first magic guy, and that still doesn't work. Saul wins, always, period. So we're now at Guilty Gear Strive, where the big thing is that the president of the US, Vernon, wants to hold a meeting with the world's superpowers called G4 in order to improve world security and the like. But now, Ino shows up again, takes out a part of Ariel's, something known as Happy Chaos, and they start scheming. At G4, that man offers himself over to the US to keep himself safe, and then everything builds up to some big reveals. Chaos abducts the White House and wants it to get shot down to create worldwide war. Ino wants a magic book inside that man to become a god and gain her full powers. That man, also known as Isuka, says he wants to keep this magic book and spend the rest of his time on the moon, and the president is actually a cyborg. To bring this long saga to an end, that man removes Saul's gear powers by removing the flame of corruption from within him, making him now officially Frederick, and then to get rid of Ino completely, Axel Lowe switches her place in the timeline with his girlfriend, who was Ino's alternate self, and now we're waiting on an anime to be released next year. Yay. Again, like I said at the start of the video, I really apologize if some of this stuff doesn't make sense because I'm no lore expert. This is just me trying to piece together the important bits of the main story from what I know and understand, whilst also keeping it as short as possible, which I probably think I failed at this point. But that's not all, because underneath this crazy plot that seems to keep growing by the second, there are more crazy stories that are taking place. I won't go over all of the main scenarios, just some of the more exciting ones. Probably the most straightforward side story is that of the state of Zep, officially independent airborne state of Zep. The most complicated thing about this story is that it is airborne, which started out as Ultra Dreadnought in 2011, created by an Indian after they left the UN a few years prior. 15 years later, in 2026, the project is complete and they declare independence, and what sets them apart is that they believe in science as opposed to magic. However, Zep was plagued with class issues and slavery until Commander Gabriel took the highest power by force in a coup. They're still not in the UN due to electronics and science being banned and all, but now they're doing well and just hover above the Indian Ocean. I mean, if you just look at the correlation charts in the GG world, they're literally outside of the main story all the time. Another group that hovers outside of the main story but has more relevance to the overall plot is the Assassin's Guild. 1 year before the main story of Guilty Gear proper takes place in 1999, 1998 saw the foundation of the guild after groups of assassins started gathering around a man named Slayer. Slayer is a character that I will get to in just a few minutes, but for now, the guild was created in order for its members to bring back a steady supply of blood for Slayer, who is in fact a vampire. However, as the years passed, Slayer got more distant after meeting Sharon, an ageless human, and the core philosophy of finding fresh and good blood was no more, as the assassins did what they do best, ruthlessly killing others. A man called Zato became in charge of the guild, but has some demon spirit parasite thing constantly feeding on him called Eddie, which has to be both the most lighthearted and scariest name a parasite can get. Anyways, more and more members joined the guild, such as Milia Rage and Venom. However, during the many years of its active killings, they killed a man called Tsuyoshi for being an undercover cop in the Syndicate, which is a guild who also turns out to be a mentor of a certain Chip Zanoff. Now, Chip is an interesting fellow because he is constantly trying to avenge his mentor in the many years to come, and then at some point, I'm not sure how it happens, but he just finds some unoccupied land in East Africa and creates the Eastern Chip Kingdom. Not officially a nation, but you gotta respect the guy for just up and creating a nation. But back to the guild, Zato dies after succumbing to Eddie, I think, and then Venom becomes the leader. Overall, they're pretty involved in the main story, as many of the core members have connections to the main plot, and also to the post-war administration bureau. There are also the Jellyfish Pirates. Led by the cool gambling guy Johnny, they're a group of sky pirates who, besides Johnny, are all young women. However, the reason for its foundation is a noble one, as when Johnny was an orphan when his father was killed by a gear, he stood up for himself and realized that not everyone could do that, so he would help any way he could, and that's how we meet May. And now on the wiki, it says by the time Guild Gear 1 takes place, Johnny breaks out of prison just in time for May not to find out she is Japanese. Okay then, let's talk about Japan in Guilty Gear. So basically, when Justice declared war on humanity for the very first time, she destroyed Japan, and there were only a few survivors left. For the general public, the Japanese were protected as national treasure, but secretly, all the remaining survivors had been genetically modified from that explosion and have some secret power, gear, I have no clue. They're literally just built different in this world. Anyways, it's the Jellyfish Pirates who found Dizzy, who ends up becoming Queen Dizzy many years later. I know that some of the lore stuff here is a bit, well, bizarre, but there are some more aspects that make me struggle to comprehend what is going on, but in a good way. So for the remaining two aspects, I'll put them into two tiers. One of them is beyond Kirby logic, and the other is just beyond any reasoning at all. So starting off with the Kirby logic tier, we have Kai Kisk and Dizzy. Kai is Soul's rival, the shadow to his Sonic, or the other way around. Kai is the leader of the United Kingdom of Illyria, but that's not the biggest loophole in this. So Kai is a regular human being, but at the end of Strive, Kai uses something called Dragon Install. What's the issue with this, you may be wondering? Well, it can only be used by gears, which Kai isn't. Right? Yeah, no, he's becoming a gear somehow. So remember Kai's wife, Dizzy, who was a gear? Well, she is allegedly Soul Bad Guy's daughter, who marries Kai, and they have a child together called Sin, who was then the foster child of Soul, meaning that Soul is both the best man at the wedding whilst being the father to both Sin and Dizzy to different degrees, but because of how Dizzy is transferring gear powers to Kai, somehow, does that make Soul the direct blood to the whole family Kisk thanks to the gear transferring? How does Kai even get the gear power transferred to him? I'm just lost. So moving on, there is Slayer. Slayer is the vampire, like I said earlier. That in itself should already make him confusing enough, but that's the problem. What is Slayer? I know he is a vampire, created the original Assassin's Guild, left after they strayed from his vision, but what else? Like, he is the reason why Soul Bad Guy is called Soul Bad Guy, thanks to some of his advice that he gave him. There aren't many vampires left either, due to a lot of them not getting that constant flow of blood. However, there's more. Slayer is regarded by many to be the strongest fighter in the world, and it is also implied through gameplay and arcade modes that he is holding back a lot of the time, or all the time. The strongest guy in the universe is some old vampire guy who lurks in the shadows and fights every once in a while. So that brings the big question that puts him in the beyond Kirby logic tier: how strong is Slayer actually? And that can also be applied to Bedman. Bedman went toe to toe with Slayer, and according to the wiki, only used 8% of its power. So what is Bedman? And I can't answer that because I haven't played the Xrd series of games, but from what I understand, it's basically this guy that's asleep on a moving bed contraption. Now I'm going to go on a complete whim because I don't know enough about this character, but if I understand correctly, Bedman is asleep all the time and has infinite powers, so it seems, but if Bedman wakes up, their power is unleashed at max, meaning that sleeping is the only way to contain them. I just don't know anymore. With that, we can move out of the Kirby logic tier and talk about the characters that transcend any type of normal human comprehension. In my opinion, it's these three guys here that are giving me my biggest issue when it comes to grasping the laws of this universe. We can start with Axel Lowe. Now, to give credit where credit's due, Axel Lowe's story and powers actually have a pretty good explanation behind it. The problem is that his powers are so insane that no matter what explanation is given, it's just too much to ignore. Basically, Axel had a girlfriend as he was living happily in the 1990s, but somehow ended up in what the wiki calls a time slip and was transported 200 years into the future, and by some sheer chance survives this time jump, but also his personal universe number overlaps with Ino's, meaning that the same time laws and stuff that applies to her that lets her break rules and such also applies to Axel, but to a more fuller extent than E-nodes. So what can he do with these powers? Well, he can teleport when stopping time, and stopping time also lets him meddle with everything around him if he wishes to, like saving an entire building that's blowing up, for instance. He can also casually summon himself to different situations, and others as well, jump between the backyard and different timelines, in turn destroying them if he chooses to do so. That's pretty OP, and the only thing that's stopping him from jumping timelines to go back to his girlfriend in his original timeline is that it will destroy that and the current timeline he is in. Even if the explanation the game gives makes sense, this power is just so broken it's not even funny, even though it is. Now we can talk about my main in the Guilty Gear games, Faust, or previously known as Dr. Baldhead. His lore isn't that important, but at the same time it is. Basically, Faust has been called an anomaly, inhuman, and unknown by many characters throughout the franchise. Why is that? Well, just look at him and the moves that he can pull off. This, what you're seeing on screen, is not normal. I watched a video saying that Faust is a character that plays by cartoon logic in an otherwise grounded world, and that's super accurate. He can float, can make his body reappear from inside his body, have an infinite supply of shenanigans that he can disrupt the match with, grabs opponents and chews them in his mess, and spits them out from a void, rides a tornado, becomes a tornado, and can teleport. There is no real canon explanation as to what he can do, or what more he can do, or what he cannot do, but this guy is him, literally. Finally, we have Happy Chaos, who is the embodiment of the original, the first magic user in Guilty Gear, and has control over time, space, and the backyard, and does whatever he wants, and is too pure and knowing to be called evil or good. Yeah, nothing more to say about that. But with that, we're at the end of the video. I know that I haven't talked much about Guilty Gear on my channel at all, but I really love this series, and hope that you guys enjoyed this very different video from what I usually make. If you did, a like, comment, and a sub all come a long way in helping the channel out. I'd like to make more Guilty Gear content in the future, so we'll see how that goes, but other than that, that's all for me. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good rest of your day, night, and week, and with that, Storm out.
That is bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the word kill me, I don't need a new one.